Being physically active is good for us. We all know this. The health benefits reach far and wide, and most of these are known to the general population because we're reminded of them so often. Maybe by your doctor, maybe by your favorite health influencer. Some of these benefits are weight management, strengthening of bones and muscles, reduction of risk of cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, improved mental health, better sleep, and many more. However, among all these benefits lies one that is less visible yet equally important. Its name, BDNF. BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor and is a little protein our bodies produce after we've been physically active. As its name suggests, it's mainly found in the brain, more specifically in the hippocampus, a region involved in learning and memory. Here, BDNF binds to its receptor and activates a whole cascade of intracellular events, of which the details are not really important to us. What is important to know is that this BDNF pathway ultimately leads to the growth and survival of brain cells, also called neurons. Growth and survival of brain cells. That sounds like BDNF is a very important little protein, right? And it implies that without it, one might experience severe neurological consequences as a result of dysfunctional brain cells. While we can test this on humans for obvious reasons, mice unfortunately don't enjoy that same privilege. In this study, researchers genetically modified mice, making them completely unable to synthesize this previously mentioned BDNF protein. They did so by replacing their gene containing the genetic code for the production of BDNF protein with an artificial, non-functional piece of DNA. This effectively knocks out the BDNF gene, and the mice, now lacking the genetic code for producing the BDNF protein, grow and develop without ever producing BDNF or experiencing its effects. Apart from this single modification, however, the mice are perfectly normal. These kinds of knockout mice are great for studying the concrete effects of a single gene, because sometimes the interplay with other genes is so complex, it's quite hard to predict what a single gene actually is responsible for. What the researchers found was that all these knockout mice without any BDNF protein in their bodies were all affected by severe neurological disorders, if they even managed to survive. The importance of BDNF is further implied by the following fact. Every human being carries a BDNF gene, but not every BDNF gene is exactly the same. A decently large chunk of the human population, up to 30% in a European sample, actually carries a slightly mutated version of this BDNF gene. This specific mutation is called Val66Met. This mutation will cause the BDNF protein to fold ever so slightly different into its final shape, and since shape defines function, the mutated BDNF will also function slightly different. Without going further into too much detail, this Val66Met mutation ultimately leads to a reduction in circulating BDNF levels in these individuals. While not being a complete absence of BDNF like we saw in the knockout mice, this Val66 mutation still appears to be associated with structural and functional differences in the brain, as well as poor mnemonic performance on verbal tasks and deficits in working and spatial memory tasks. Effects on more complex brain functions remain to be tested. It's important to note that this evidence is not conclusive, and even meta-analyses show conflicting results. Regardless, BDNF remains a leading player in this story of brain health. Certain diseases with neuronal loss like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, and Huntington's are associated with decreased BDNF levels, suggesting some role of low serum BDNF in the pathogenesis of these conditions. Most effective therapies for these pathological conditions that share deficits in the cognitive domain converge in that they all increase BDNF levels and its receptors. Now, this correlation doesn't necessarily imply strong causality, but there's obviously a link here that's still too complex for us to fully grasp, like so many things regarding the brain. Okay, so we know what BDNF is and why it's important, but why should we care? Well, we should care because we actually have some control over the amount of BDNF our bodies produce. BDNF is very complexly regulated, and many different factors have been shown to modulate its production. Some of these are passive environmental heat exposure, exposure to sunlight, time of the year, environmental enrichment, whatever they mean by this. However, one of the most potent lifestyle factors impacting BDNF levels is physical activity. Yes, you heard that right. Just moving about causes your body to make more of a little protein that improves your brain health, and that's beside the cardiovascular benefits for the brain. But you might now say, if there's all these other factors also influencing the amount of BDNF my body produces, why then should I concern myself with being physically active when it's only a small piece of a large pie? Which is a fair argument when we're only looking at the BDNF producing aspect of being active, since apart from that, there are numerous benefits as said before. But even when looking purely at its effect on BDNF, there's still an argument to be made. And I will try to explain this by disrespecting the complexity of the human body and making this extremely simplified graph. On the x-axis we have time, and on the y-axis we have BDNF levels. We learned from the knockout mice that we need a certain amount of BDNF to develop normally, neurologically speaking. But once you reach a point of having sufficient BDNF, more does not equal better. A normally developed person will not develop supernormally if given more BDNF. So, broadly speaking, we can divide the BDNF levels then into two, with insufficient for normal functioning and sufficient for normal functioning. Almost all people will reach this green zone of sufficient BDNF, even if they've been inactive for their entire lives. That brings us back to the question, why bother with exercising when there are these other factors influencing my BDNF levels, putting me in the green zone? Well, in my opinion, you should exercise even if you're already healthy, because it will keep you better for longer. As we get older and our bodies deteriorate, functional decline becomes inevitable. BDNF levels also plummet with age, and is thought to be a major cause of the onset and progression of the neurodegenerative diseases seen in the elderly. Now imagine this person is physically active. Whatever small increase in BDNF this produces will push back the moment his or her BDNF concentration becomes insufficient to sustain the survival of brain cells. So, harvesting these benefits from physical exercise seems only logical in a world where people are living longer and longer, and neurodegenerative disorders are therefore becoming more and more prevalent. Okay, so what kind of sport should we do then? According to this systematic review, not all sports are equal when it comes to raising BDNF levels. Ranking from most likely to least to raise your BDNF levels are the following types of exercise. Resistance training, so weight, body weight, rubber bands. High intensity interval training. Combined training, which is defined as a multimodal type of training with strength, flexibility, balance and endurance all in one program. Aerobic plus resistance training. Aerobic training, which is defined as low intensity but for a prolonged time. And then came the conventional group or the control group. The reason why resistance training seems to be superior is that it stresses bones and muscles more, which stimulates these tissues to produce more BDNF. This will then be released into the bloodstream and carried up and into the brain where it will exert its effects. Another research group tried to find answers to questions like, how much exercise do we actually need to get a certain increase in BDNF? And what kind of increase do we need to have a noticeable effect on certain disorders? But they essentially came up short because of the complexity of the matter and our limited understanding. We'll just have to be content for now with knowing that sport is medicine. In summary, physical activity has a plethora of benefits for the human body, especially for the aging human body, as it delays the inevitable functional decline that comes with age, but also for those unfortunate enough to experience neurological impairment at a young age, or just those interested in living a long while healthy life. One of these benefits is the promotion of growth and survival of brain cells thanks to an increase in concentration of the protein brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Exact guidelines for optimizing BDNF production are not yet possible to construct, so just go out there and move however you like. The sciencey vids take a bit longer to make, so if you liked it, feel free to let me know and drop a like. Likewise, if you don't want me to waste your time nor mine in the future, feel equally free to let me know and drop a dislike.